Welcome back to video 9 of Blender Quick Tips. So as we discussed in the last video, we will talk about the render engines. Now if you go to the render engines tab under the rendering section here, you will find Cycles, Eevee and Workbench. Workbench is basically this view here, so we will not talk about it. So to put it simply, Eevee is the real-time render engine in Blender and Cycles is the realistic render engine inside Blender. There are more renderers like V-Ray, Octane, RenderMan, but let's only talk about the render engines that Blender comes in default with. So let's look at these scenes so I can explain better what Eevee and Cycles does. Starting off with Cycles, you can notice instantly how realistic it looks. And to describe what the scene does, there is a spotlight here which shines on the wall, and there is a area light on both sides of the scene, which was scatter lights. And when we move to Eevee, we instantly notice how the shadows have disappeared, how the scene is not lighted up as it should be, and how the lights are super weak. Now before we get deeper into Eevee and Cycles, let's talk about how renderers work. Now there are three ways how renderers can work: rasterizing, ray tracing, and path tracing. Path tracing is basically how Cycles work. It takes into consideration that the light bounces on object to object inside the scene and comes to the camera, which is why these lights, these huge area lights, work on Cycles, and these lights are much brighter because a light is bounced many times, and which will give you this really nice dark shadows, really bright areas here, dark areas here. And rasterizing is a way of rendering where it takes into consideration the object, and the object has a color roughness, and if a light is directed to it, it should be brightened up, and a texture map of shadows which respects the light direction. Which is why Eevee doesn't have all those shadows, but this light works really well because it's very direct, and if you go closer you can see the normal maps much better in Eevee. And ray tracing is basically where the renderer recognizes where the light is coming from in respective to where the camera is looking. So Eevee uses a little bit of ray tracing, which I have turned on here, and if I turn it off, it's mostly rasterized renders. While Cycles, as I mentioned before, uses path tracing, which makes it super realistic. Let's move on to the next collection of lights, which Eevee performs better. So if you understand Eevee better, Eevee works better with smaller lights that does not scatter so much. So this is a smaller light which is directly connected to the scene, and this is the Cycles view, this is the Eevee view. If you remember the raster renderer, which we will look at again on the end of the video, you will have noticed that these areas were not having these nice shadows here, but overall the scene is much darker. We will fix that in a minute. But the scene looks much better than the first example we had. So let's go to the next collection where I changed this light, which made everything better. Now this render is much better than the last one, mainly because it has these nice shadows, it has these sharp shadows here. The reason why this works is because this light is smaller and Eevee doesn't have to calculate a lot of things. If I turn on ray tracing, it will give me a much better result with ambient occlusion and all that kind of stuff. So let's compare the rendered images. This is image 1 where the light was scattered. You can see how this area looks much better than this area here. But still the normal maps are showing, the color is showing, the roughness and everything is showing pretty well. And also take into consideration that I've done some post-processing here, which makes the light looks much glowy. I have also included it here, but it doesn't look that well because in Eevee the lights are not that strong. And moving on to the second render, which we understand Eevee and do a better job with the lights. Here is a comparison of the fixed Eevee version, which almost looks similar to the Cycles render we had. Of course it's not perfect, but with real-time rendering, this is a really good result. Alright, that's it for today's video. Stay tuned for the next one where we'll cover the settings in Cycles. Until then, have a good one.